Right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Neil Loach. I'm the president of IOH, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's webinar in the series of 21 for 21. I'm delighted also to welcome our sponsors, Vitalograph, certainly also very delighted that we have so many people that have subscribed to tonight's webinar. It's the most popular. I can see why. I know there's been a lot of anxiety around restarting spirometry, and I'm sure that Charlene Mhangami, who is going to be tonight's presenter, is going to give us lots of tips on how we can restart spirometry safely. Now, I know that there are a lot of you that are IOH members, and a very special welcome to you. For those of you that are not IOH members, excuse me, that's my puppy in the background, that are not IOH members, then certainly you would be very welcome to join. If you'd like to go to ioh.org.uk, the cost of membership is just £10 per year. So that's not per month, it's per year. And Lynn has put in a link in the chat. So thank you very much for doing that, Lynn. So on behalf of IOH, again, welcome. And I don't know whether, Adrian, you're there, whether you want to say a few words as well.
Hi, Neil. Yeah, I'm here. I'm here taking a back seat, so going to let Charlene do all the talking, but here if anyone's got any questions or anything at the end or wanted any help.
That's wonderful. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Charlene Mhangami, who is tonight's presenter. Charlene, it's over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Neil. So good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining this evening's webinar. I would like to start off by thanking the IOH for this opportunity to host this webinar on restarting spirometry. So as we're all aware that we had to stop our spirometry services for nearly a year due to COVID-19. However, now we're looking at restarting spirometry, particularly in occupational health. It's really important to restart spirometry, with the main reason being spirometry in occupational health can be used to assess a worker's work status and also monitor a worker's respiratory health over time. So it's really important that we get back to testing and get back to monitoring our patients. So kicking off with the presentation, these are my speaker disclosures. So I'm currently a UK application specialist at Vitalograph, but my journey in respiratory didn't begin at Vitalograph. So it actually began when I first obtained my degree in healthcare sciences with specialism in respiratory physiology and sleep physiology. Following on my degree, I went on to work at Nottingham University Hospitals as a respiratory physiologist, performing full lung function testing. My time in Nottingham, I experienced different types of patients, different disease groups, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time performing full lung function. Following on from Nottingham, I went on to be employed by Vitalograph as an application specialist. So within my role, I'm a product specialist. I provide training on our devices. I also host spirometry workshops, and also I provide support to the wider team there as well. Sorry, I've just got a message on my Teams there. So yeah, so if everyone could just mute their microphones as well, just to ensure that it's nice and silent. So
Charlene, sorry, it's Adrian. Yeah. We can't see your slides.
Oh, you cannot see my slide?
We could at the start.
Just a moment. Okay, just a moment, guys.
Fun of modern technology and virtual
presenting.
Have to
love technology sometimes. So can you see that all okay?
Yeah, we've got it back now.
Okay, lovely. So as I was just explaining then, my current role at Vitalograph includes product training and also spirometry workshops, and I also provide clinical advice to the rest of my team as well. So now you know a little bit more about myself. I'm going to get straight into the presentation there. So this is this evening's agenda. We're going to look at the current COVID-19 situation within the UK. We're going to look at how to tackle the backlog of patients. We're going to look at the risks associated with spirometry and also go through how to safely deliver spirometry. And at the end, there'll be time for questions there as well. So kicking off with the current COVID-19 situation within the UK. So we are entering a potentially more stable period within the pandemic. But as we all know, with COVID-19, it's something that we didn't expect and couldn't have actually prepared for. But as times have changed, I'm glad to say that we are actually at a much more stable period and we can actually start to look into restarting spirometry, because when the pandemic first began, it was all very hectic and all the services had to be stopped. So I'm glad that as time has progressed, we've managed to get to a point where we can look at restarting testing. So at the moment, the government is focusing on vaccines as the first line of defence over the autumn and winter months. So the majority of the population has received both of their vaccines, as well as the majority of healthcare workers have also received both vaccines. So that puts some confidence to say that you are protected. However, the winter months will bring renewed challenges. As you all know, the winter time is quite an intense time for respiratory viruses such as flu. So COVID-19 is going to be lingering around other viruses such as flu, so we have to be extra cautious. As well with COVID-19, even though we're at a much more stable stage, there is always this new worry of new variants potentially coming around. So it's really important to be as cautious as possible and also to be aware. Now we're going to move on to tackling the backlog. So the ARTP, the Association for Respiratory Technology and Physiology, states that there are roughly 20,000 spirometry tests are performed per month within the UK. So over here, we're trying to gauge exactly how many patients potentially could be within the backlog. So can you just imagine 20,000 spirometry tests per month, and then over a year's time, those tests were not being performed as how they usually would be. A bit more insight as to potentially how much of a backlog there could be. There are 200 to 250 patients per 500,000 population who are in the backlog to need spirometry. This evidence comes from the clinical commissioning group. They looked at the database of patients who were newly prescribed bronchodilators without systemic evidence. So the systemic evidence being spirometry. So that's quite a large amount of patients who got prescribed medication without the testing as there as well. So all these patients within the backlog, they might have had respiratory symptoms and then given provisional diagnosis, and then now they're potentially waiting for spirometry to add to that diagnostic picture there as well. So from this first slide, I just wanted you guys to gauge exactly how many patients could potentially be in the backlog, and I'm sure it will vary across your various departments there as well. Now we're going to look at looking at tackling the backlog. So in occupational health, spirometry results can play a central role after hiring somebody. So as I mentioned at the beginning, so spirometry can have an effect on a worker's job assignment. It can assess exposure to irritants and also the efficiency of a worker's personal protective equipment. Therefore, when we're looking at tackling the backlog, we need to prioritise those patients of where there is a clear clinical indication for spirometry. By this, we mean that the patients, they must be symptomatic, or the referral must have a clear indication for spirometry. Therefore, routine spirometry is of low priority. So in occupational health, I'm aware that you test some patients annually just as a matter of routine testing. Now, we're not saying that those patients are not of priority, but those patients who are highly symptomatic, they are much of a higher priority than just standard routine testing. However, with such a backlog, with various disease types, various different cases and referrals, there needs to be a strategy when tackling your backlog. So you need to structure a way within your departments as to how you're going to tackle the backlog of patients. So as we're all aware, spirometry as a standalone test is insufficient to make that informed respiratory diagnosis. However, spirometry is a key path of that overall diagnostic pathway. So spirometry should be performed to identify those who have persistent respiratory symptoms such as breathlessness or accessional dyspnea, which is breathlessness. So, moving on to the risks associated with spirometry. So a recent document by the PCRS, the ARNS, the BTS and the ARTP came together to create a joint document on risk minimization within spirometry. Within this document, they mentioned that spirometry is no longer considered as an aerosol generating procedure. But this is completely different from the beginning of the pandemic, when it was seen to be as an aerosol generating procedure. So since spirometry is not an AGP, the cough associated with spirometry has the potential to generate those aerosols. So the main risk with spirometry is that risk of coughing. Okay. So if we're aware of this risk of cough, we then were able to set policies and standard operating procedures to manage the infection prevention, to control the risk of coughing, and to reduce those aerosol spreading. So how you guys create your SOPs will vary across different departments, but as long as they are following national guidance, then that should be fine. But I would highly recommend creating policies and standard operating procedures to train all your wider team so that you're all following the same consensus to ensure that your patients are safe, and then also yourselves are safe as well. So within spirometry, cough-associated spirometry mainly occurs following a forced maneuver or a prolonged expiratory maneuver. Now, I'm sure you've all performed spirometry yourself, or some of you might have just observed spirometry, but you do know when somebody performs a forced maneuver with maximum effort, the chances of them coughing are very, very high. As well as bronchoprovocation procedures are likely to induce that cough as well. So for example, mannitol challenge testing, or if you're to do challenge testing with a baker, for example, who works in a factory, and you're performing a challenge test with them, you are trying to provoke the airways. So the chances of them coughing is very, very high compared to when you are just performing normal spirometry. So when you're looking at your testing, you do have to be aware and realize that certain spirometry tests will make patients cough more, okay? And then you need to be prepared for that. So therefore, we need to be cautious and then again, utilize those strategies to reduce the cough and then reduce the transmission of the particles. So if we are aware of this risk and where this risk is most likely to occur, then we're able to look at ways of reducing that risk and reducing the transmission there as well. So this cough risk of spirometry is something that is not new. This has been around or for a while. So on the screen there, I've got a study by Kimberly et al., who looked at 122 individuals with chronic respiratory diseases, such as bronchiectasis, asthma, ILD, and over 51% of those patients coughed following spirometry. Continuing on with the same study, there was a subgroup who had no prior history of coughing, and approximately a third of those patients coughed following the procedure. And the last bullet point there is mentioning an audit at the Royal Brompton Hospital has shown a similar prevalence of cough following spirometry. Okay, so coughing spirometry is something that will happen, but the COVID-19 situation has heightened how much of a risk it can be and heightened how much particles and aerosols can be spread with just a single cough. Because I'm sure previously, before COVID, you might have patients that would have just coughed really quickly at the side and that would have been fine. But now we need to kind of be more cautious as to how to control this cough. However, when spirometry is performed in a closed circuit with appropriate filter in use, then less aerosols are likely to spread. However, if you have a patient performing spirometry and then you have them connected on the filter, and if they cough off a filter, then of course all the aerosols will spread exactly like the chap in the image there. So cough is not only the main risk within spirometry. There are other potential causes of cross-contamination. So these other potential causes are skin contact and the aerosols particles, which is the AGPs, and then also saliva or fluid. So I'm sure sometimes when you've been doing spirometry, when you get your patient to come off the mouthpiece, there might be a bit of saliva that's dropping, or even when people cough, they produce certain body fluids as well. So we really have to be cautious as to the main risks that spirometry can bring us. And if we are aware of these risks, then we know how to tackle them. So with these risks information, it wasn't to scare you or anything, it's just to make you guys aware of the potential risks that spirometry can produce and the potential effects that the risks can bring there. So now we've discussed the current COVID-19 situation within the UK. We've looked at the main risks associated with spirometry, which is cough, but then we also need to consider the body fluids as well that can be produced during spirometry. Now we're going to cover pre-screening. This is particularly important as pre-screening is where it begins in ensuring that you guys are safe and also your patients are safe. So pre-screening should always be undertaken to reduce risk. With pre-screening, we're trying to rule out any patients with active COVID-19 symptoms. We're trying to stop them from entering the department. So there are things such as lateral flow testing, which is widely available, which will help prevent this. And as a population, it does seem like people do follow the rules most of the time, but as healthcare workers, we need to take that extra step to ensure that we are safe and also the patients are safe as well. So pre-screening precautions will vary across various departments. So you will all form your local policies on infection control, and then within your wider departments, you will probably have some infection control policies that would have been created there as well. So pre-screening is really, really important, and there are various ways that you can pre-screen your patients, but then they should all follow the national guidance and then also your local trust or your local department's guidelines as well. A main easy pre-screening tool is a pre-attendance questionnaire. So this is an example of a pre-attendance questionnaire. So the main questions that is on this questionnaire, so the writing is quite small a little, so I will read some of these questions out. So one of the questions is, do you have a high temperature? The next question there is, do you have a new continuous cough? And the next question there is, do you have a loss of taste and smell? Does food or drink taste different? The next question there is, are you breathing harder or faster than usual? The next question there is, have you had a nose throat swab for COVID-19 within the last 10 to 14 days? The next one there is anyone in your house self-isolating? The second one in from the bottom is, have you been advised by the NHS test and trace to stay at home? And then the last question there is, have you had 2 doses of the COVID vaccine? So this is just an example of a questionnaire that you can formulate. So you can also ask this questionnaire over the phone before the patient attends, but you can also send this questionnaire within their letter as well, just to make sure that they're aware these are the questions that they will be asked when they get to the department. And also you can send a text reminder 24 hours before they are due to come into the department, just to confirm that they are free of any COVID-19 symptoms. So like I mentioned, the general population, everyone seems, on the same boat with regards to COVID. So I think people will be quite truthful and willing to comply with these questionnaires. Just continue on from this questionnaire. I would also recommend re-asking these questions on the day of testing as well. And if you can, within your departments, I know some people do test the temperature as well, just to make sure that everything is fine. And another advice I would say is, if you can advise your patients to attend the appointments alone. So when you do this questionnaire, also inform them to attend the department alone, just to reduce the amount of people that are in the department. But of course, if they can't attend alone, that's perfectly okay. So just looking at pre-screening in a little bit more detail there. So spirometry should only be provided by an appropriately trained healthcare professional who is certified and competent and confident within the role. So being certified and competent is really, really important with spirometry, because we need operators to obtain those technically acceptable results, those repeatable results, but then we also need practitioners to be confident in being able to counsel a patient on what to do if they are to cough, be confident in making sure that the patient also feels safe about their spirometry test as well. Also, there are a list of recognised relative contraindications to performing spirometries that you will all be familiar with. So in addition, spirometry should not be performed if a patient has symptoms of COVID-19 at the time of the test, or if they know to have been in contact with anyone with COVID-19. But like I said, people are willing to comply, and they should really provide you with this information before they reach their department. So it's really important that you're all trained and competent and up to date with the current guidelines, so that you're able to deliver spirometry in the safest ways possible. So moving on now, so we've discussed the current COVID-19 situation within the UK. We've looked at the risks associated with spirometry. We've looked at how to pre-screen our patients, so all those important checks on the phone, the day before they attend the appointment, and also on the day of testing. Now we're going to get into preventative measures, so looking at ways that we can deliver spirometry in the safest way possible. So potential preventative measures. So prior to beginning your test, you really have to spend some time counseling your patient as to what actions to take if they are likely to cough. So some potential pre-counseling things that you could tell your patient is they could either cough into the filter that you're using during the test, they can either cough into a face mask, or they can cough into a tissue as well. The main thing we're trying to avoid is having the patient just coughing and spluttering all over the room, because especially in spirometry, as we've discussed, cough is not something that is new in spirometry. It's something that is likely to happen, and when a patient coughs, they don't plan to cough. It will just happen unexpectedly. So it's really, really important that you do spend time with your patient, even if it means an extra 10 minutes or 5 minutes, just discussing with your patient to know exactly what they need to do if they are likely to cough. It's really, really important, because this small little details will help your departments to ensure that there is a reduced rate of transmission within the departments. The next point there mentions that staff have to be aware of a patient who has history of cough or a cough-related condition. Because if you're aware that a patient has a long history of coughing or a cough-related condition, then you're able to, you know this before, then you're able to inform that patient on what to do if they're likely to cough. Or with regards to PPE, which I will discuss in the next few slides, with regards to PPE, you will be able to know whether you need to go on the next stage with PPE or keep it very, very minimal. Okay, so in individuals where there is that high chance of an infective cough, it is recommended to do a slow or relaxed vital capacity maneuver, followed by a 1 or 2 second expiratory force maneuver to obtain that FEV1. So there are ways of obtaining the measurements in those that have a high chance of coughing. So moving on there to further preventative measures. So I briefly mentioned the 2019 guidelines in my previous slides there. So the 2019 ATS-ERS guidelines state that spirometry should be performed using a single-use bacterial viral filter. So on my screen here, I've got an example of a bacterial viral filter and exactly how it works. So you can tell there that the filter traps exactly everything, and then no aerosols are going through that mouthpiece at all. Now, I know that across various departments, everyone has different devices, different types of mouthpieces, but it's really, really important that you have a look at the mouthpieces that you're currently using to ensure that there is a filter within that mouthpiece. Because I know in the past, people did used to use cardboard mouthpieces. Now, I would stay away from those cardboard mouthpieces. Even before COVID-19, I wouldn't do a lung function test without a filtered mouthpiece, just for my safety. Like I said, there are, various respiratory diseases that are around, so TB, flu. So having a cardboard mouthpiece just means that all those virus particles will just go through into the wider room. So it's really, really important that you check the type of mouthpieces you're using. When you go on to check your mouthpieces, you can't just use any odd type of bacterial viral filter. It's really important that you check with the manufacturer of your bacterial viral filters to ensure that it meets the ERS guidelines. So the European Respiratory Society produced a statement on conducting lung function testing during COVID-19 and beyond. So they recommended using a high specification disposable inline bacterial viral filter that has an efficiency for high expiratory flow rate. So it has to have the efficiency of a flow of 600 to 700 liters per minute. Okay, so the efficiency of your bacterial viral filters has to have a flow rate of 600 to 700 liters per minute. So I would definitely check with the manufacturers of your mouthpieces to ensure that you have a suitable bacterial viral filter, because it wouldn't be great if I'd recommended you to go and get a bacterial viral filter and then you do go find some and then you actually find out that they're not very efficient. So the thing to remember with your filters when you're checking with manufacturers is it has to have an expiratory flow of 600 to 700 liters per minute. Okay. So this is just a summary of all the preventative measures. So all tests must be performed using a single-use antibacterial antiviral filter. The spirometry must be cleaned between as per manufacturer's COVID specific instructions. So it's really important that it's per your device manufacturer's COVID specific instructions. So this is something to check with them. But as a minimum, this should involve cleaning the outer casing of your device, of the transducer, and also the outer part of your spirometer using an alcohol wipes. So the type of wipe, again, I would confirm with the manufacturer of your device to ensure that the type of wipe that you'll use to clean your device is actually working well to get rid of the virus. Okay. So unless the patient is considered high risk, as you guys as operators, you can just wear standard PPE. So the standard PPE being a gloves, apron, a visor, and a surgical mask. But if you have patients that are high risk, you can expand this. You can see the fourth bullet point there says that a Perspex screen would actually provide an extra barrier between you and the patient, but also you can also advance your PPE. So if you feel like you need maybe the FFP3 masks, they could be useful. Or actually, if you have a patient, that's got a history of cough, so they are likely to cough, then you can actually go on to wear potentially a blue gown just to increase that protection further. So it's all about looking at your patient, looking at the risks to the patient, and also the risk to yourself as well. So if you're ever to test any patients with immune vulnerability, you have to consider how best to test them. So when I used to do tests on patients who were post-transplant or immunosuppressed, we used to get them in very, very early before everybody else, just to ensure that the chance of them being exposed was very low. So it's all about looking at your patient and then making sure that they are safe as well. So
Charlene, we've lost your voice.
I think it's just disconnected me there. Can you all see the screen?
Yeah, and we can hear you again.
Okay, I think my connection just disappeared very briefly. Okay, so as I was just saying there, as able. So starting off by opening all the windows within the room. And then if available, so if you're in your testing room, if you have some sort of mechanical air circulation, this should be in the region of 6 room air changes per hour, which will clear 90% of those aerosols. Now, the ventilation rates of that fan will determine how long the process takes to clear the aerosols. So this is where it's important to speak to your site managers, any caretakers, anyone who's going to know about your building and its ventilation system. Definitely spend some time with them discussing whether the room has any ventilation starting off, and then finding out how many air changes that room has. And then the last point there says the use of extraction fans can also be useful to circulate the air as well. Now, there might be other options that will allow you not to perform spirometry within the department itself. So I've heard of people performing spirometry in a drive-through kind of system just to reduce the amount of patients within the department. And also I've heard of virtual spirometry, but I think the virtual option is not as best as having, somebody face to face and then really coaching them through the spirometry test. So just looking at ventilation in a little bit more detail in regards to those air changes and the removal of those aerosols. So simple dilution for old air to new air using a standard heating, ventilation, conditioning system will take 28 minutes to remove 99% of that old air. So this equates to 10 air changes. However, it can be 41 minutes, which is a little bit longer, to remove 99.9% of that old air. So the fallow time, this is the time of when you clean up all your devices, the room. This is the time when you clean up the aerosols. That's when your fallow time begins. Okay. So the fallow time is determines how quickly those aerosols are removed from the room. So fallow time fallow time decreases as the air changes increases. So that second bullet point there says 50 air changes, which is amazing. Like I would, if I was in a clinic, I would love to be in a clinic room with 50 air changes, as this would require 6 minutes to remove 99% of those aerosols, and it would be 8 minutes to remove 99.9% of those aerosols. However, if I was to be testing in a room with 2 air changes, this would take 138 to 207 minutes to completely remove those aerosols. So this is why it's really important to find out what sort of ventilation system does your clinic room have, and also find out the air changes that the room ventilation system has there as well. But if you're in a room that does not have a ventilation system, then definitely open up all the windows widely as possible. And I know the temperature is dropping, unfortunately, now. So you might have some patients say, oh, it's super freezing. Can we just close the windows? Definitely disagree and keep the windows open. And then just reiterate to them that the windows are just open to keep the circulation going. And that the last bullet point there says that the HTM03 ventilation for healthcare guidance document sets out the actual ventilation requirements for healthcare premises. So the minimum ventilation standards for clinic rooms is 10 air changes. Okay, so definitely spend some time with your caretakers or site managers to find out what sort of ventilation system your room has and how many air changes that ventilation system has, because that will determine how long you're leaving the room in between each patient. So obviously, how long you leave the room between each patient has an effect on the clinic overall as well. So these are things you need to consider with regards to preventative measures. Now, just to summarize the points that I've covered here. So consideration has to be taken to prioritising the groups of patients with a focus on those of whom spirometry will potentially impact their treatment pathway or determine the worker role there. So if you remember, you have to really filter through your referrals and see who is high risk, who needs immediate testing. And I know various departments collect their data across various ways. So some of you guys might have paper referrals, and so you're able just to filter through and see who says, you know, maybe a probability of asthma. So that would be a patient that is high risk, because there is a probability that this patient has asthma, and then the asthma could potentially affect, you know, the work role. So, but then you could also have all your referrals online, so you're able just to search up certain symptoms or certain patient groups. So really spend some time within your departments and as to working out how you're going to filter through your referrals, so that you're going for the high risk patients, the high priority, so that your working system works well to eventually lead you to those, you know, of low priority. And always consider the COVID-19 pre-screening. So again, within your departments, create those standard operating procedures so that you have a set way of pre-screening your patients, so that nobody should turn up to your department and say, oh, actually, you know, I've got a little bit of a high temperature. You really don't want to be in that situation. And that's where pre-screening comes in handy. And like I said, with the majority of the population, most people are willing to comply with things such as questionnaires, but then you can also double check on the day of testing as well, just to make sure that all is fine. And then high quality standard operating procedures are the cornerstone of reducing that risk and that cross infection between staff and patients undergoing spirometry. So this is where maybe you'll have to train your wider team, just so that you're all following the same thing. Just to reduce that risk, because I think it's quite nice if a department has a document to say, you know, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to follow with regards to COVID-19, and then you all feel much safer, and then you also feel much safer knowing that the rest of your colleague are following the same consensus. So that this is why it's really important to create those high quality standard operating procedures with regards to COVID-19. And ensure that the room is well ventilated. So ensure that, you know, windows are there, well opened. If you have a ventilation system, again, find out from your site managers about the air changes of that ventilation system. And also ensure that, you know, you've got the appropriate PPE, and where it needs be, you definitely can, you know, expand their PPE, because there are various types of masks. And then, like I said, if you have a highly infectious patient or someone that is high risk, you can wear a blue gown just to increase that protection there as well. And as well, between your patients, the room should be cleaned and disinfected as per your local policies, as per your SOPs. And this again will just work further to reduce the cross-infection. And then within this as well, this is where you'll be cleaning your devices as well. So with regards to cleaning your testing rooms, I know at the beginning of the pandemic, it was very stressful as to what do I clean within the room if somebody is to cough. So we would recommend that you clean absolutely everywhere where a patient touches. So the door handles, even the height measurements, the weight scales as well, the chair arms, the desks, even the areas that you also touch yourselves wearing those gloves. So your laptop area, your mouse, any areas that you have also touched wearing gloves should be given a good wiping down as well. And as well, in most cases, most healthcare professionals have received both of their COVID vaccines as well. So this should work to reduce the risk even further. But also within your teams, you might have some team members or staff members that, you know, they've got some kind of respiratory disease themselves, so they could be deemed as a high risk. So within your department, you need to do risk assessments for these individuals, the staff members, to ensure that you're not going to put them in a risk situation. Just to ensure that they are feeling safe as well. And the last point there, always test using a bacterial viral filter. Do not test using anything that does not have a filter. And remember as well, check the efficiency of your bacterial viral filters as well, because again, referring to the ERS document, it has to have a flow rate of 600 to 700 litres per minute as well. So if you're wondering about the points that I have discussed in today's webinar, and if you want to have a reread or to re-go through some of the points, you can head over to our website, so www.vitalograph.com/UK/healthcare/restart Spirometry. Or if you go onto our website and search Restart Spirometry, you'll be able to download this guide, which basically summarizes all the points that I have discussed in today's presentation. Okay, and we've summarized the 5 key points to remember there. So a super useful document. So that is the end of the presentation, and I hope you found that informative and you're feeling much safer with regards to restarting spirometry after such a long break. Now we've got some time for some questions, and I will just stop sharing my screen. Okay, so any questions at all for anybody?
I know there's been quite a few people that haven't been able to type in the chat, Charlene, including myself.
Okay.
I suppose if people wanted to ask a question and they can't type in the chat, could you raise your hand? And you can do that by clicking on the third little icon where it says show participants, then you've got conversation, and then you've got a little man with his hand raised. So if you click on that hand raise, it will raise your hand, rather like I'm doing now. So I can see that Justine Green, you've got your hand raised.
Can you hear me okay?
We can just about hear you, Justine.
Okay, one moment. If you want to ask somebody else, I'll get my headset in, it might be a bit clearer.
We can hear you now. Go ahead, Justine.
Lisa.
That was a really good. My question is, in terms of spirometry, I know we want that to do.
Christine, I'm sorry, you've gone really, really quiet again. So, Melanie Bradford, you got your hand up.
Yeah, hi Charlene, thanks for that presentation. It was really great, really informative. I just wanted to ask whether you would recommend a specific filter.
Yes, so I would recommend the Vitalograph bacterial viral filters. So they actually meet the ERS guidelines, and
Okay.
you can head over to our website and find those.
Right, that's brilliant.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, obviously we would recommend our own, funnily enough. But if you do go on our website, if you look under consumables, you'll be able to see the different types of bacterial filter. But on there, you can actually review all the testing that's been done on them. So whatever bacterial viral filters you do go for, do check that they've been tested, because one of the things that came out over the COVID period that the ERS recommended, not just the percentage they talk about, the 99.909%, but also that they work at certain flow rates. So they're actually effective at over 700 litres per minute. And a number of bacterial viral filters out there aren't. So it is worth, whichever one you go for, do have a check that they've actually been tested at the higher flow rates.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, both of you.
And then we've got Paul Edoze. Your hand is up, Paul. You're on mute, Paul.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Thanks, Charlene, for this wonderful presentation. My name is Paul Edoze from Nigeria. So I have a question with regards to the ventilation. So the center where I practice, we have an HVAC system in the room that we use for spirometry. So just a quick question about the air exchange, because from the ventilation ratio you talked about, you said we should be able to achieve this 99% in about 28 minutes. So is this specific to a particular type of HVAC system, or any HVAC system would suffice?
No, so this is determined by the efficiency of the ventilation system and its ventilation rate. So the ventilation rate will let you know about the air changes, and then the air changes will determine how long it takes for that aerosol to clear. So I would recommend finding out from the manufacturer of your HVAC system or the site manager and finding out what are the air changes that system has. And determined by the air changes, it will determine how long it takes to clear the aerosol.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It looks as though there's a question in the chat about is there a biodegradable or eco filter on the market?
So again, I'm just recommending our filters, that they are actually eco-friendly filters that we have.
Yeah, so once again, just on that, so funny enough, we have one called an Eco BVF, but there's some things to bear in mind. So it is biodegradable, so it can be recycled. So you could put that in a standard bin for recycling. However, you just have to be aware what the local policies are with whether you class that as clinical waste, because obviously a patient has breathed on it. But yeah, they can be recycled. But what we've done with those, the other reason they're eco is because we use around about 54% less plastic in the manufacture, and we also use around about 80% of the energy for a standard filter to be made. So what we found is that they have a greener footprint anyway, and we also fit more in a box than a standard box, so that we try and reduce the carbon footprint for actually transporting them as well.
Seems to be another question about, are there reusable filters,
No.
or is it all disposable? And they are single patient use, I understand, so they are not reusable and must not be reused.
No, very much so. Yeah,
even by
don't reuse them. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, really don't reuse them. Partly because one, obviously they've become saturated, but the other thing is the way the material works, it's also electrostatically charged. So that's what actually holds the bacteria and viruses. So that will degrade over time once they're used. Now, in the past, there were reusable filters where you would take them apart and replace the material inside them. I don't know anyone that continued doing those because it became such a burden for people to clean them and then keep replacing the actual material. It didn't make any sense.
There's also a really interesting question. I think Lindsay's answered it really, about what if your site merely has window ventilation? How do you work out air changes? From my days of doing occupational hygiene, I think Lindsay's absolutely right. It'll be less than 6 air changes per hour with just windows. But of course, it also depends on the efficiency of the building, because if it's a very new airtight building, that will make a significant difference. If it's a drafty old building, that could make a slight difference as well. But generally, it may not be safe to do it if there are not the recommended amount of air changes per hour.
And I agree with Neil on that one.
There also, where is it? I'm just going back through the chat. I know there's going to be, I think Jane Lavery's offered to share a risk assessment, so that's excellent. Thank you very much, Jane. I know she's got to get consent to do that, but I'm sure if you email Jane, so it's jane.lavery@adeptoh.co.uk, that's in the chat. I'm sure Jane will forward that on once she's got consent. What else do I see?
There was a question about the ARTP accreditation.
Yes, there was.
Now, I have a vague recollection of seeing, I'm sure it was on Twitter, and I'm just trying to find it, that mentioned this. I don't know if anyone else has heard anything.
Yeah, it says, do you know what date the ARTP accreditation or certification needs to be completed by? And then it was Suzanne O'Neill says that it's delayed, I believe, by the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I have a funny feeling, though. I did see something about it is coming back.
I know
so if I find anything out, I will send it out through the IOH.
There is a huge debate as to whether people should do ARTP accreditation within occupational health, because we're not diagnosing, we're just screening. And I know that that's been bandied about for many years. So I think that working to the standards is absolutely best practice. Whether you choose to go down the accreditation route really depends on you know, what your interpretation of those standards are. So,
I agree, Neil. I agree, and I think what we would recommend is, it's been a long time since anyone's done any spirometry, so getting on for 18 months. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to have retraining, but also in 2019, the ATS and ERS released new spirometry guidelines, and there are some changes to normal practice. So we would certainly recommend people get up-to-date training so that they know what the up-to-date recommendations are. But I think we all recognise occupational health has very much been ignored in the ARTP training and the accreditation. So maybe it's of no benefit to you guys to do that. But I think that's a choice to each individual. On a completely separate note, Jane said about advise cleaning the transducer in the machine. It does depend on the manufacturer's recommendations. One of the tests we had done on our bacterial viral filters to see if the device did need cleaning, and we've proved that with our device, it was obviously tested on our device, with our filters, you do not need to clean the device. You just need to wipe down the outside with an alcohol wipe, because the bacterial viral filter meant that nothing went through it.
Jane Mann. Yeah.
And it's been up a while. It's Tanya.
Right. Hi, Tanya. I do apologise.
No, that's all right. It was the same questions I asked yesterday on the other training, but nobody answered. We have rooms with only window ventilation have been looking at CO2 levels based on a couple of research studies. Has anybody else been doing that, and what are they finding?
That's a really interesting question. That's a new one on me, Tanya. Thank you for that. So really, I suppose it depends on CO2 levels that are being expired by individuals in the room. Is that right?
Yes, and
yeah.
and it's just, there's a couple of papers, I can send them to you, Neil, when I'm at work tomorrow.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah, we've been looking at them just because we don't have great ventilation, and you know how long to leave the rooms and stuff between spirometry if we would introduce it, but we're finding that in some of our rooms the CO2 levels are quite high just with two people in conversation in a room.
Yeah, I mean, it may well be a really good idea. The standards that you were talking about air changes in the document, Charlene, that would be a really pivotal piece of information to use within a business case to get air conditioning installed into clinic rooms where things like that are actually going to be done. And that obviously the air conditioning unit has renewable filters within it. And exactly where you can get so many air changes per hour that will then confirm that it would be safe to do that from an air change per hour basis on your risk assessments. So obviously a business case might be the best way forward. That might be interesting to look at. Tanya, what do you think?
It's the HTMO3 document.
In public money, yes.
Tanya, just a quick question. Did you see the article that's on the HSC website about ventilation and air conditioning during coronavirus, which does talk about CO2 monitors?
I did read it, but it's a while back and I wouldn't be able to quote from it.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah, there's we've also got two separate independent studies that we've been sent as well. One of our doctors sourced, which is why we went down the route of looking at the CO2 levels before we resume spirometry. And we're still doing those at the minute just because the results were not great.
Yeah, wonderful.
Monica, put a link to that in the chat.
Monica has just put an interesting question that I think we could probably be debating for hours, but do we need to be overly concerned re air changes? And I think, the distinct answer from me is yes, because obviously if you haven't got the required amount of air changes and, there is a possibility that somebody could be carrying, even though they don't have symptoms, then the clear answer to that one is yes, you do need to be concerned about that, because obviously if you've got a really stuffy room with very little air change, then the risk is going to be significantly higher to the clinician, as well as any other patients that then come into the room. So I would say yes, you do need to be concerned about air changes, and that should be a pivotal part of your risk assessment from, as far as I'm concerned.
Neil, the other question I wanted to ask Charlie, really, from her expertise, is those that have had their double vaccinations, but it's now longer than 128 days and haven't yet had their boosters, would that increase their risk?
I would say yes, they're still at risk, because as we've seen with the vaccines, people do still get the virus with them. So yeah, they're still at risk.
Yeah, it's just you talk very much about if you've had your two, then, it's reduced risk. But I would say if it's over the 128 days, you need to consider there is a waning protection.
Yeah, so
absolutely. We must remember as well that, COVID vaccination doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get COVID.
Exactly.
It's probably going to reduce the severity at least. So I mean, I think it's a bit of a lottery. It's an important part of thing, something to include in your risk assessment, because it does lower the risk, but it certainly won't take it away, will it?
No. I think this conversation about the booster vaccines is very interesting, actually. So as time progresses, it will be interesting how the government lays them out.
Yeah, there was somebody saying, I saw in the chat about Jacqueline Hennessy, my last Spiro training recommended 3 blows of FVC and 3 for FEV1. Are you recommending just performing 1 of each to reduce risk?
No, still follow the technical standards for performing spirometry. Don't deviate as to the minimum or the maximum attempts that you do.
Yeah, so it's still 3. That's what I'd interpreted it as well. So that's good. Right. We've got Ruth C. You've got your hand up, Ruth.
Yeah, my question was about the rooms, because I have my own office, but I have to go across to a number of sites throughout the area, and I will be visiting. The rooms are set that I'll be using are potentially in a porta cabin, very little ventilation, and the recycling centres I'll be visiting. So the less chance of having a really good airflow in those rooms is not going to be good, because there's no such things as clinical rooms. It's offices and rooms that we'll be using. What do you recommend in those situations?
I think really it comes down to your risk assessment, doesn't it? And if your risk assessment is robust and says that it's high risk because you haven't got enough air change, and that it's not a suitable clinical room that would be suitable for wiping down between patients, and that there are no soft furnishings that could potentially be a cause for concern, then it wouldn't be safe to do it. So I think really it's about your risk assessment and the robustness of that and the findings that you have. I don't really think there's anything else that I could offer on that. Is there anything from you, Charlene?
I would agree with that, Neil. It's all down to that risk assessment, definitely.
So would you then sort of look at having a robust questionnaire that you're giving them to do as per the HSE guidelines? They have said in the past robust questionnaires just as good as doing the testing.
The robust questionnaire is going to be better than doing it and putting, yourselves and your patients or workers at risk, definitely. But I think that, like I was saying earlier, if you haven't got suitable clinic rooms, then certainly, it may well be better to look at if you've got specific risks to workers by not having them, then obviously referring them on, or getting in somebody, for instance, that might be able to do the ones that are required to be done in a safe manner, which could be mobile. There are lots of the mobile providers now that have done robust risk assessments, that have moved on from the days of doing it with the back door open. I think I saw one recently. They were saying that they were saying they had to blow out the door, which obviously isn't going to be recommended. But yes, there are suitable alternatives if you can't do them safely, which would include the questionnaire, would be my opinion. Does anybody else agree or disagree?
I agree with that, Neil.
And then we've got Veronica. You've got your hand up.
Hi, yeah. I get asked, well, not me, but well, I do get asked by the business I work for. I support the rest of my team with giving the HSE updates at the end of every month regarding spirometry and what we should be doing, and it's brilliant, Charlene. It matches everything that you've said, and what I get mostly is, so are we doing spirometry as we used to do it? If they have no problems and they've never shown any issues with the breathing, and they're telling you from that robust questionnaire that their breathing and lungs haven't changed, they've got no new conditions, they're not suffering with anything, that we actually say, okay, that questionnaire is enough, we don't need to do a spirometry, and actually only do the spirometries on those people that come to us and say they have asthma, whether it's very mild or very brittle, any COPD that we have, anybody with any sort of lung or respiratory or something new, regular infections perhaps, or they've had COVID and are still struggling maybe with long COVID, with breathing. So I suppose basically what I'm saying is, do we do the questionnaire and go by that and only do spirometries on those that are absolutely requiring it, or do we start doing it now on everybody?
I would recommend doing it on those that are requiring it, so symptomatic patients.
Brilliant. Okay, that's what we've been doing. We do need to look at the air flow, like you were saying earlier. I don't think that's been done, but we do have really good hygienists that can come and do those measurements for us as well. So, but that was a really brilliant point to bring up actually, because like I say, I don't think anybody's thought of it to be fair. So thank you for that.
Right, there's somebody just sent in a message that I don't know whether she's still here, but Karen, they're actually going to be trialling drive-through spirometry, which is okay as long as there's no wind whatsoever. So that's interesting. The innovations.
Actually, Neil, there's another issue that people don't tend to think of. Spirometers aren't meant to actually be tested at very low temperatures,
Absolutely.
and it will affect the results. And we've seen a lot of people doing car park testing who have struggled in the heat, but also struggle over winter. So obviously, during over the last Christmas period, people were trialing it, and they ended up spending a lot of money to get purpose-built tents, basically, to do it, to try and make it so it wasn't too cold. But as you say, it's watching out for the wind, but it's also the temperature when you're testing. So do whatever device you think about using, just check what the operating temperatures are for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, Nicola, you've got your hand up.
Hiya.
Hi, Nicola.
Can you hear me?
We can indeed,
Yeah.
thank you.
I was just saying that where I work, we've started spirometry, and it's kind of all the kind of things that you said today, Charlene, about the risk assessment, the COVID risk assessment and things. The only thing I didn't think of was what Tanya brought up was the CO2 monitoring, because we basically just got ventilation by opening windows and things like that, and it's quite very well ventilated, to be fair. We usually leave quite so at least an hour between each client, and also we shut the room off after that day and leave 24 hours with the room ventilating. That's what we've done in our risk assessment. We also use FFP3 fit tested masks, because we went to our lung function department and that's what they were doing. Whether that's the right thing for anybody else, that's a different thing. That's what we're doing at the moment. We've also prioritised our load. So I've done a Cat 1 and a Cat 2 basis. So Cat 1's meaning the symptomatic. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of people in our trust that are symptomatic. And then there's a Cat 2s that are baseline, because that's what we tend to do, baseline spiros, and then if they have any issues with them, we do the questionnaire. But a lot of it is based on the questionnaire, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, it may well be worth thinking about, for a lot of people, getting occupational hygienists in, or, people to actually look at hair changes to make sure that it is safe to actually do these things. That might be a solution. But it also could tell you that it's not safe to do it if you've not got the required amount of air change. So I think it's going to be exciting times. So I know that, we're all chomping at the bit to, ensure that we can restart spirometry, because we've got so many backlogs. But obviously it's really important to remember that, you've got to do it in a safe manner for all concerned. Amanda Sharkey, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just interesting you mentioned about the temperature and the spirometers, because I remember doing mobile health screening, having to get there an hour early to let the van warm up enough to do the spirometry. But that's why I said, one thing we haven't spoken about, we've talked a lot about the risk assessment of the individual. We've not actually considered that risk assessing the actual exposure, because there is a valid level 1 and level 2 surveillance, and the level 1 surveillance, as far as I understand, is following an initial spirometry, is questionnaire-based surveillance unless someone then reports symptoms. So it's always been a valid approach, if depending on the exposure risk.
Yeah, excellent point. Couldn't agree more. Right, Janet, you've got your hand up.
Oh, actually, I'm going to do a plug, if that's all right. So Vitalograph have got an excellent article coming up in the OH today, which should be published in the next week or two. So please look out for it, especially if you've enjoyed this webinar, as I very much have. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Having looked at the preprints and what have you, I think it's a really important article, and I'm looking forward to it coming out. And then we've got Jenny. You've got your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Couple of things, as you can perhaps tell by my voice and the coughing. I've had both my vaccinations, but I have COVID at the moment. Oh joy. And the other thing, I don't know, I think people need to be aware that aircon is not ventilation, it's a cooling system. And I think that needs highlighting.
Yes.
Because I think some people are seeing aircon as the ventilation, and it's not. I know we're going to have problems because we have to use offices and stuff, and I know one in particular, the windows don't open, they're intentionally sealed, and there is mechanical ventilation. But now obviously I realise we're going to have to look into, is that mechanical ventilation sufficient? What actually does it provide?
Yeah,
and
you can get air conditioning units that are specifically designed to ensure that you get a certain amount of air changes per hour. But obviously, we're talking about the more expensive ones. General air conditioning that we might buy is not going to guarantee a particular type of air change. It would really be dependent upon temperature. Whereas some of the the more modern buildings will have definite air changes per hour that can be pre-programmed. So I agree with you, but obviously it really depends on the systems that you've got.
Yeah.
Right, wonderful. So I can't see that anybody else has got their hands up. So I'd like to introduce Rufus, who is IOH mascot. He wasn't going to be, but by popular demand, lots of people that we were on a call with at the board said that Rufus has got to be our mascot. He's my 11-week-old puppy. He's an absolute little darling, but also a pain in the backside, bless him. But I'm sure you'll be seeing lots of Rufus. So finally, I'd like to offer my thanks to both Vitalograph, Charlene Mhangami, and also Adrian Feinberg, who are indeed our esteemed sponsors. And obviously this session is being recorded, and at some point in the very near future, we shall obviously put this up onto the IOH YouTube channel, where obviously you can watch this incredible presentation back again at your leisure. So I'd like to offer my thanks to everybody for joining the webinar tonight, and also please remember ioh.org.uk and £10 membership per year, and we look forward to welcoming you as members. There's lots more webinars that are coming up, including a talk by Libby Morley on suicide prevention and talking about mental health. And then we've got Pip, who is going to be doing a talk on silicosis. Is it the next asbestos? And quite a few more before the end of the year. So we'd love to welcome you to all of those. So obviously, thank you, Adrian and Charlene. Is there anything finally that you'd like to say?
I would like just to thank everybody for joining in, and if everyone has any questions for me, I will put my email in the chat, or Adrian's done it. You can email me and then I can get back to you there. But again, thank you for joining this.
Yeah, I'd like to say the same, and I'm just acting as Debbie McGee.
Adrian, got anything?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Bye-bye.
Bye.